makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
The UN's COP26 climate summit is currently underway in the city of Glasgow, Scotland, although if you watch CNN, you might be forgiven for thinking it was actually in Edinburgh, which is where they sent Wolf Blitzer. Actually, you wouldn't be forgiven because you're watching CNN and getting your news from CNN. But yeah, anyway, the event really started, I think, on the wrong foot, or a rather unfortunate PR stunt that took place during a G20 meeting in Rome just before the COP26 began. And here you had the leaders of the G20, or at least some of them, because Mexico's president isn't there. And in fact, he's not at COP26 either. I'll say a bit more in the end. But yeah, this was basically a photo shoot of them at the Fontana di Trevi throwing a coin. And why is this really bad optics? Because it makes it seem like their fight against climate change will be down to luck, versus the fact that all of these people have agency in, pushing the necessary laws, the necessary measures to bring down emissions to a level which will not lead to a climate apocalypse. So it's down to them. They have the power to do that, but they choose not to wield that power because they are ultimately beholden to corporate interests. And that goes, we often criticize the West, these G7 or Western countries, as thinking of countries like the US and perhaps Britain, who are the more egregious examples of liberal capitalism. But the social democratic countries, they're also quite disappointing in terms of their climate efforts. They act like they do a lot domestically, but they also export or rather outsource a lot of their pollution to other countries. So that way it looks like their record is much better than it actually is. I made a video on this, which I will link at the end. So yeah, and others like Canada, who are committed to, like, Alberta oil, things like that. They really, Trudeau does not have a very good climate record at all, no matter how woke he pretends to be. Anyway, my fears of COP26 being just a giant PR stunt were confirmed when I saw the pavilions. This reminded me of pretty much every single business fair that I've ever been to. It also particularly reminded me of the Farnborough Air Show and the Paris Air Show, both of which I've been to. And you have these pavilions with all these defense industries and aerospace companies giving you pamphlets and booklets of their latest GPS-guided air-to-ground missiles, as if they were selling you car parts. But yeah, when you look at this, you can tell that this is entirely a corporate-friendly, kind of glitzy, PR consultant organized event. There's just nothing natural about this. There's nothing that displays any urgency of what's going on, and I think that is really bad. So let's look at this short video.
I'm here at COP26 in Glasgow, and right at the minute I'm in the pavilion section, and as you can see around us, it's really busy. The pavilions are representing countries and organisations, and they're great showcases for individual climate action. There are more than 80...
So all of these pavilions look like they've been organized by each country's respective export agency or foreign investment agency, because it looks like they're there to attract investment. That's kind of what they look like they're doing.
Pavilions at COP26. Asia is represented with pavilions.
Scale, accelerate. Again, corporate buzzwords. It could be organized by McKinsey, for all I know.
Pavilions from Indonesia, Thailand, South Korea, and Japan. But China and India, who are critical players at these talks, do not have a presence. Middle East countries are strongly represented here, especially big fossil fuel producers, UAE, Qatar.
I would not be surprised if, this all looks like almost in a corner of the logos you would see sponsored by Exxon or sponsored by BP, because it almost looks like they would be. That's just how much of this looks like a giant corporate PR exercise, rather than, the fate of fucking humanity rests on what goes on here, and you're dealing this like if it was a business fair. You gotta be kidding me.
And Saudi Arabia. Australia, another fossil fuel powerhouse, is here too, luring people with free coffee. So these pavilions help bring people together, and that's really important at these climate talks. The negotiations are quite intense. There's sort of rivalries between countries, but when you come here, there's a much more convivial attitude and atmosphere. So a lot of these pavilions host events, they host press conferences, they have free food and drink, which of course is a great draw, but they also showcase individual action. They show what countries can do, but they can also show what countries can do together. And what's really interesting at this COP now is that there are also pavilions for very specific issues around water, around carbon emissions, around methane emissions. So that's part of the process of educating people, again, of bringing people together and getting them to really understand the issues.
I'd be very curious of who actually sponsors those like thematic pavilions. Yeah, I would not be surprised if it was like the global cattle industry sponsoring the Methane Moment Pavilion. Nothing would shock me at this point. But hey, at least the guy was honest and said that most people were hanging out because of the free food. I'm sure it was sustainably grown by indigenous Paraguayan farmers. I'm sure they'll do well when our planet boils in the next 30, 40, 50 years. Anyway, there's also, now that the metaverse is a thing, now there's also virtual pavilions as well. Again, this is just a complete corporate exercise, just pure PR bullshit. Let's be honest, there will be nowhere on Earth that's going to look like this by 2100 at our current rate. It just won't. You'll be able to see it in a VR headset, but not in real life. And what's more egregious, I think, is who they've also invited. Billionaires, because of course, businesses are the centerpiece of everything that goes on under capitalism. Not people, businesses. Everything has to revolve around how businesses will behave. And, well, they invited Jeff Bezos, where he pledged $2 billion for restoring nature, restoring landscapes, and transforming food systems. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some benefit to Amazon from this. Maybe all these food systems will be provided with Amazon one day, Amazon Prime shipping. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like when the US gives free food to developing countries, like sacks of rice. It's all American rice imported. It's not like we're gonna help your local farmers grow rice and then we're gonna buy them that rice and then give it for free so it can be no. It's rice from like Kansas farmers, sent all the way to insert whatever starving African country. This seems to me like it's kind of the same thing. But let's put this into perspective. 2 billion seems like a lot for normal people. It's basically 1% of his current net worth, 203 billion, as it stands right now. And let's see what else he spends his wealth on. So he spent 5.5 billion to be in space for 4 minutes. So let's compare 2 billion to try and heal the world, 5.5 billion to see the world from above for 4 minutes. And he didn't even make it to space. But yeah, that is, I don't know why he's invited. I don't understand. This is why you can't take this seriously. If they're inviting the people who are directly responsible for the fact that, taxing polluting industries is impossible in a country like the US. And, companies that outsource so much of its production. Look at any product that is Amazon branded where it's made in China. So then they have, countries like the US then blame China for climate change because they're indeed the most polluting country on earth. When China is just basically building the things that Westerners consume. And anyway, I just want to end this with some charts that show where we're going. This one is, I'm sure you've all seen some variant of this chart. The orange shaded area is our current trajectories, which will lead to a 5-degree Fahrenheit rise in global temperatures. I don't know what that is in Celsius. Come on, Americans, just join the rest of the world and start using fucking Celsius. That's probably like 3 degrees, I guess. I'm not sure. Probably 3. And then the blue shaded part is what we would need to do to limit global warming to just 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which I suspect is 1.5 Celsius. I think that's kind of the target, the target that is most often quoted. So yeah, that's how far off we are from doing what we need to do to not turn the world into a Mad Max wasteland. Now, it's true, China is the world's biggest polluter. India does not seem to be here, but Indian emissions are growing quite steadily as well. I don't know if they're as high as the EU or the US yet, but presumably if they're not, then they probably will be at some point. But again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is due to products produced in China that eventually are consumed in these other countries that then brag that they've capped emission, that they've contained their rise in emissions. When, if you add the import side to this, then it doesn't look that good. And obviously, you can't look at this chart without taking into account the historical aspect of this, because the good thing about the climate discussion is that history does matter tangibly, because the emissions that are out there right now are emissions that have been accumulated over many, many decades. So yeah, the historical responsibility matters. And the fact is, the United States has been the single country that has been most responsible for the existing emissions out there. So yeah, they have to do more. The EU is second place, and China is indeed closing the gap. I'm sure they will be number 2 very quickly. There you have Russia, also a massive polluter. Brazil, mostly through land use. And yeah, there's a lot of other developing countries that punch above their weight. I should mention Mexico is a country that punches above its weight in terms of emissions, and that's because of our oil industry, our state-owned oil industry. And I mention this because of this chart. So the annual funding goal for climate finance is 100 billion, and we've never met the mark. And the private sector has contributed very little to this, which just goes to show how uninterested they are in, having a livable planet for future generations. And that is sad, because the majority of emissions have been undertaken by private companies. Sure, there are a lot of state-owned oil or energy or whatever industries that have contributed to a lot of pollution. Obviously, you have countries like the USSR, which back in the day was basically the state that was contributing the emissions. But most of the emissions are from private companies. Yeah, like I said Mexico as an example of a country whose oil industry is state-owned, mostly state-owned. But that's the exception. That's not the rule. So they should be doing more, but they're not. And yet they still have a seat at the table. Yeah. So I'll be honest, I don't think COP26 is going to lead to any definitive agreements. I'm sure they'll draft some rousing declaration, but with certain language that, if you read between the lines, shows a lack of actual commitment. I'm sure, I don't know exactly what they're going to come out with, but I'm sure it's going to be a rousing statement that really lacking in substance and lacking in any commitment. And, the fact is, we're fucked. I'll be honest. We are fucked. We are fucked. Whatever positive political changes that will happen for us to eventually either get rid of capitalism as it exists now, or sufficiently tame it that it becomes more planet friendly, those changes will not happen early enough for us to make a significant impact on the current trajectory that we have. So we're fucked. I'm sorry, we are fucked. And this is the moment that I take my anti-capitalist hat off and I put my misanthrope hat on. This should not surprise anyone, because we are a freaking species that, since its very inception, has dedicated itself to fucking itself over in however ways it can. So now that we have the means into fucking over the entire planet and every single living system in it, then that's exactly what we're doing. That's what human beings do. That's why we're a fucking shit species. So I truly hope that once the damage of climate change becomes so obvious that it can't be discounted, and that the type of social conflict, possibly even war, or other mass tragedies that will result from this, leads us to change our ways, will be positive but insufficient, because the damage that we have already done by then will probably take centuries to revert, if at all it's possible. I don't think it could be reversed. But yeah, a great world we're inheriting to our children. So yeah, this might sound fatalistic, but it's still not a reason to stop fighting. So kudos to the people who are actually out there in Glasgow protesting or writing about this, and showing that this is a farce, and that if we don't take climate seriously, we are fucked. So on that note, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And in case you haven't noticed by the background, I am back in Mexico. Yes, the end of the Nicaraguan adventure. Elections in Nicaragua are happening soon, on Sunday, and I will be making a video on this, because I didn't talk about Nicaragua at all while I was there, for a reason that I will explain also in a video perhaps tomorrow or sometime this weekend. But yeah, wait for it. It's coming. And I will see you next time.